Today on the first episode of Day Trip in Wisconsin, we're going to head out to the North Central Wisconsin Antique Steam and Gas Engine Show in Edgar, Wisconsin. So stay tuned.
Every day across America, excess food is gathered by a network of good people at local food banks, giving hope to millions of children who struggle with hunger. They've earned their wings, and you can too. Together, we can solve child hunger. Support Feeding America and your local food bank at feedingamerica.org.
Today we're here with Greg. Greg, can you tell us a little bit about this event going on today?
Well, this year's the 43rd annual North Central Wisconsin Antique Steam and Gas Engine Show. This year we're featuring Alice Chalmers as our primary feature. Simplicity Lawn and Garden Equipment is our secondary feature. If you'll look around, you'll see all kinds of nicely restored and also some is still in their work clothes, Alice Chalmers equipment.
Okay. Now I see, I picked up the flyer and there's always a featured tractor. Is there something special behind that?
This year's featured tractor is a 1938 WC Alice Chalmers unstyled. Unstyled meaning that was before they come in with the fancy sheet metal like you see on this tractor here. It's before when they started out with engines and tractors, they didn't have any coverings or shrouding, so they were called unstyled. And then as time progressed and they wanted to add more automotive-like lines to it, then they would enclose the engine area and the fuel tank area. More streamlined, also makes a more appealing product.
Right. With the history, how did all this get started?
This show was started back in 1972. It was a meeting of several old-timers who had steam engines and threshing machines, wanted to get together and show people how things were done years ago. And that's how it started. It moved in 1972. It was at the old Procknow Ballroom north of Edgar. Then in 1973 it moved to State Park Speedway. It was held 1 year there, and then the following year Kurt Umnes, who was one of our charter members, offered up his farm as a site for the Steam and Gas Engine Club meeting, and we've been here ever since.
Now, talk about being here ever since. I know when I was a child, I didn't grow up not too far from here, and I see that there's quite a few young people. Is that still a tradition that the family brings the young ones with?
Yes, it is. The Steam Show, or the Edgar Steam Show as we call it for short, is very much family oriented. What we've got parents and grandparents bringing the kids along, and they're pointing out the different pieces of equipment they operated, in their youth, and explaining to the kids how things work, because a lot of this machinery, it's obsolete. It's old, it's antique, it's beyond obsolete. But we've got people that have gotten together and they've acquired these pieces, they've restored them, and they're working them, they're demonstrating them, they're showing people how things were done years ago. Because if we don't show them how it was done, they won't have any idea, because it's not the same as looking at a piece in a museum. Out here, it's working, it's live.
And even though it's antique, it's fairly simple.
The older equipment, just like older cars, were much simpler. This was before computers and electronics, way before any of that. But at the same time, it is older, 60, 70, 80-year-old equipment. It can be temperamental at times. It's just, you're dealing with old technology. It's simple, it's easier to repair, but at the same time, you got to remember, it takes a little tender loving care to keep it going.
Right. And it's always fascinating just watching, the steam tractors or a kerosene powered tractor. I mean, just the simplicity behind it, how much easier at the time for the farmer it was, or in the logging industry, depending what industry was involved.
A lot of this equipment, it's a graduation from horsepower. The guys were looking to get away from horsepower because, number one, the horse requires care 365 days a year. You got to feed it and water it, and you got to take care of it. A tractor, you just park it in the corner and shut it off. Right. You don't have to look at it again from fall till the next spring. As an example, where the horses required maintenance year-round, the farmer there was a formula for the number of horses you had and the size of the farm you had. you needed X number acres of hay just to feed the horses. And then the rest could be devoted to cropland for your dairy animals, beef animals, hogs, chickens, whatever. But it was like a 25% of your farm needed to be devoted to just feeding the horses. Well, when the gas tractor came along and modern equipment to go with that, well, geez, all of a sudden they could take that piece of equipment and they could utilize that land instead for production for crops, be put into the animals that they then sold or into cash sales.
Now, since we have modern technology and modern farm equipment, there must have been a time where there was a so-called switch from burning, wood and coal and using water to boil a boiler.
To operate a boiler. There was a transition.
To go into gasoline or kerosene. When was a period where it phased out, where the farmer just went over to something that was petrol powered?
I would say the 1930s. It was a transition of decades. 1915, 1925, 35, 45. All in that era, you still saw some steam-operated equipment running, and you still saw some of the older engines being utilized, but you also saw newer equipment and newer ideas being enforced. And you still see that today. You will see maybe a smaller farmer operating on 30, 40-year-old equipment, running his farm that way, and then right next door you'll have the big mega farmer who has a lot of acres to cover. He needs newer equipment, he needs bigger equipment to cover that in a reasonable time frame. So you'll see that, today you'll see that transition, 20, 30, 40-year transition in equipment. Just, driving down a country road, you'll see that.
Right. And then talking about the cost of equipment today versus back in the early 1900s, and I thought about this the other day, what was probably like the average cost of like a full case steam tractor back at the day?
I'm not sure, maybe about a threshing rig maybe cost $10,000 to $12,000 back then. If you had something like that available on the market today, it would probably cost upwards of $100,000. Set up the way those pieces are, just taking into account inflation, how much prices have changed. Same thing with your tractors. Prices on everything.
Yeah,
40 years ago it was cheaper than it is today, but today's equipment also has a lot of nice modern conveniences, safety features built in that all adds to the cost of equipment, efficiency, that all comes with the price tag.
Right. Well, we're here talking with Greg here at the Edgar Gas and Steam Show. We're going to take a look around, so stay tuned.
It's a short ride from your neighborhood to your naturehood. To find a neighborhood park or green space near you, visit discovertheforest.org.
Kevin, and Kevin, can you explain a little bit about this? It would be a thresher, right?
That's correct. This threshing machine is a 1916 Ellis Keystone thresher. It originally was used at the Hancock Experimental Farm down in Hancock, Wisconsin. It was used for thrashing grain plots down there. Now in 16, when they purchased this to use it was ideal for that, but in generally this is a 1870s design thresher, but it worked for that or for isolated farms. It's what they call a hand feed, which means instead of pitching the bundles in with a fork and feed it into a threshing cylinder, a person stands on the front of the machine and hand feeds the grain handfuls at a time so it can thresh it out.
And what would power this? Would it be by...
Okay, we're powering it here with a hit and miss gas engine, a 5 horsepower, which would be typical for this size of a thresher in that period.
Okay.
For this size.
Now, for some that don't know at home, or a hit and miss engine.
Oh, okay. A hit and miss is a heavy flywheel engine. It's called hit and miss because that's how it's governed its speed. It literally misses the cycles.
Okay.
It's, when you hear one running, it sounds like it's backfiring, but really that's the only time it's firing.
So it's kind of like a lawnmower is a continuous run, but a hit and miss is just every so often.
Right. It's impulse power.
Okay. And that technology I've seen is probably a little bit more reliable than, say, you know, the normal engines that would continuously
Okay,
run.
yes. Well, the hit and miss engines basically replace the steam engines in a lot of applications, particularly small power applications. The steam engine required you had to haul water in the boiler, you had to fire up the boiler, and that took an hour to 45 minutes before you could start, whereas a hit and miss gas engine, you poured a pail of water in the hopper, turned the ignition on, cranked it a couple times, you're up and going. 5 minutes you're going versus 45 minutes to be up and going.
Now on this thresher, I see there's lots of exposed parts on here, and I grew up on a farm, you know, when I was younger, there's always guards.
Yeah.
Now,
Well, this is pre-OSHA time. There was no such thing as guards. And this is partly intentional by the manufacturer because they wanted to show simplicity and they wanted to show the operator how it works. It's quite apparent from looking at what's going on.
Right, and it seems quite simple just to work on it if something was going to break down or you need to fix something quick.
It was immediately accessible.
Right, it's not like our new cars today where it's got like 20 miles of wiring in there, you can't even do anything about it. Now with this hand thresher, by feeding it in there, how does all this work? I mean, there's quite a few pulleys.
Right, right. Well, it's really a 3-process system. When first we fan it in the front, there's a cylinder in here with spikes on it. It comes through and rakes the grain off the heads. After it does that, it throws the grain and the straw up on racks inside of here. And what these racks do is it sifts the grain down into what they call a fanning area. The straw goes out the back and the grain falls to the bottom. And as the grain falls to the bottom, there's a fan there that blows out the light husks and the heavy grain goes all the way to the bottom of the machine.
So with that, then you're making quite a few products then out of this machine from one source that you put into it.
Well, you're separating the grain from the straw. And from various adjustments you can do from wheat, rye, barley, oats, all the small grains, it's capable of doing that through changes.
Right. And when I'm watching on TV, when they're talking about, you know, like bushels and stuff like that and how much a machine can output, what was the normal, you know, input and output of a machine at this size?
I would say you could probably cover, if you had a good crew and dry straw, you might get probably 30 bushels through it a day.
And probably back then it was probably quite a bit.
That was quite a bit. That'd be like a couple acres.
Couple acres.
Okay. But you know, if a person had this, Usually he owned it, and he did this in his off time.
Okay.
He didn't do it during harvest season. You'd bring all the shocks of grain in, you either stacked it or you put it in a bow in the barn, and then you did it either when you needed the grain or when you had some off time, and then you would spend a few hours thrashing with a small machine like this.
And I suppose that way then the farmer was more productive of actually clearing the fields than doing
Right,
one section
yeah.
and then doing this and then going back and doing, and then it rains and then
Then you lost your grain out in the
Right.
field.
so. Well, Kevin, thank you very much for showing us this thresher here, the hand thresher. I never heard of one until you just mentioned it. You know,
Yes.
like on a normal thresher. So,
Right.
well, Kevin, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right.
Every day across America, excess food is gathered by a network of good people at local food banks, giving hope to millions of children who struggle with hunger. They've earned their wings, and you can too. Together, we can solve child hunger. Support Feeding America and your local food bank at feedingamerica.org.
For a steam traction engine, they built several thousand from the late 1800s through about 1925. This is the smallest traction engine Case built. They did build a portable that was smaller than this, but this is the smallest traction they built. Now, if you see, Ken is pulling a trailer behind him. If you're a Case lover, Ken says that this trailer is all the fuel you need to run all day long. And if you're not a Case lover, everyone says that's all the bigger trailer an engine like that can pull. So, depending which side you are, and whether you love Case engines or not so much of a fan, that's what the trailer's for. Next engine coming down the road is a model of a 65 Case. Sold by Gary Schott out of Stanley. This engine was built in 1990, and these were built by a gentleman out of Kansas named Tom Turning. He built close to 100 of these models over the years, and they're just a beautiful example of a model that can be built, and there is several of these around the nation still running today. So, Gary, thank you for bringing that. Next engine coming around the corner is a 2585 Nicholson Shepherd. This is owned by the Hochreiter family. This engine has been recently rebuilt. This came off of a major rebuild in 2014. It's a real powerhouse of an engine. Had it on the mill yesterday. Pretty much the first time in the last couple of years it's been in the belt and it's did a beautiful job. These engines were built in Battle Creek, Michigan. Battle Creek was the home to two steam engine manufacturers. We'll also see an example of an advanced engine that came out of Battle Creek. This is a side mount steam engine. If you see, the wheels are mounted to the side of the firebox. And these were side mounts made for heavy belt work. Heavy belt work and work on that order. Next coming down the road is a rear mount Nicholson Shepherd. These were built for heavy road work, graders, plowing, and also belt work. This is owned by the Noble family. This is another great example of an operating steam engine. Still in its first. They call this engine, because their wife named this engine the Floozy. Oh, Floozy, because the guys spend more time with this than they do with their wives. So, and that's what most of the steam engine guys do. Here's just the current on this on that old Alice Donner's bulldozer. This bulldozer comes from Monongalia County. He's pulling behind it a grader that was used in the town of Hamburg to store some here for several years. It's actually what they call a hitch maker. There's not a hitch on some of the roads here this morning. Went down to the time to plow snow, and snow really got that. Yeah, this is a can that's owned by the Steam Club, and we're constantly going to be working on it to prove it, so we're looking for volunteers to build a new cab on here. The cab's made out of all wood. It's going to be a neat piece of work. Mr. Pete Paddock is driving it. Next engine coming on the road is owned by Alan Marion Turbo. This is a 22-horse advanced Raleigh. This engine was built in 1919. This engine also has seen a recent rebuild. It's got a new boiler and was put back together in 2013. Another beautiful example of a running engine. As we see a lot of these engines, you'll hear a lot of reboiling, rebuilding, and definitely a labor of love for most of these owners. There's a lot of time and a lot of money into these pieces of what they're done. The Advanced Rumley Company was in LaPorte, Indiana. It is the merger between Advanced and Rumley that happened in 1915. Next engine is a 20-horse Chase. This was built in 1911. Another reboilered engine that's been rebuilt recently that's sold by Steve Brown. A wonderful example of an early Case engine. Some of the ways we can tell that is this engine comes by, you can see the cast iron stack. You see an engine coming later that's got a rolled steel stack, then we've got a cast iron stack. It's also got a cast iron preheater on it. So as the engine goes by, there's some telltale signs it's an early engine built by the J.I. Case Company. Next is a much later engine, and this is a 40-horse steam traction engine. Now, if you look at the size of these two, you're going to say, why is that engine, the 20 that went by, so much bigger than the 40 that's coming down the road? That's an early rating where they actually rated them by the boiler horsepower. This is actually a traction or a plowing horsepower. So this later years was called a 40. In the early years, this would have been called a 12-horse. If you look at this engine, the differences are it's got a rolled steel stack, it's got a rolled steel preheater on this side up in front. This engine was built in 1919, it's owned by Gary Emmel. Beautiful example of a later traction engine and a small engine that would have been used on local farms, plowing, thrashing, and sawing. Next engine is a 1913 Advance. This was built in Battle Creek, Michigan, owned by Gabe Gadd. This engine has been in the area for many, many years. It was originally owned by Dave's father and was a charter member of the club. And this engine was used in the 30s and 40s for thrashing in the local area here. If you look at this engine, it's transition years, so the Advanced Rumley that came through a few engines ago had all built-up steel wheels, plate steel. If you look at these are actually cast wheels all the way around. This is one of the last engines that left the factory in this style. Okay, the next thing coming around the corner, you're going to see a thrashing machine being backed around the corner. This was done when they run out thrashing. You get the small barnyard, you would not be able to get a traction engine in with a separator hooked up, make the corner, get up to the barn. So they would do this, they would use what's called a bucking pole, hook the engine up with the bucking pole to the front of the separator, and push the engine up the drive, up to the hill. They would put two guys on the ground with a rope, steering it. So the two men walking alongside have a rope and they are steering the front of that separator as the engine men are pushing it up. They push it into the farmyard so they could get it up to the barn when they would barn thrash. Engine pushing it today is owned by Kurt Owens. It's a Nicholas and Shepherd side mode. That is a 27 side mode that Kurt owns. Give these guys a big round of applause. They've walked this separator this way all the way from up top of the hill, and they'll take it all the way back up there that way. That's a display you're not going to see in many places today. road is 22 fans. Roughly, this is an engine earned by Cord Omnis also. This is a late example of the 22s and some of the last engines built by the advanced rumbling company before they could build a steam. Could Green Saborski please come to the schoolhouse? Could Green Saborski please come to the schoolhouse? Next is the 1928 Road Roller. This is originally built in the Cleveland, Ohio area. It ran for 1 year, was parked out behind the shop. Has seen very few working hours on it. These were used for road rolling, both asphalt and dirt roads in that year. They run a different style boiler. If you look at this, it's got a vertical boiler on it. A lot of the construction equipment is got a vertical boiler to operate it. This incoming is a 24 Minneapolis. This engine is owned by the Gary Henning family. This engine is pretty rare. This is the last Minneapolis steam traction engine to leave the factory.
Well, that's all the time we have for now. For Day Trip in Wisconsin, I'm David Ballerstein, and we'll see you on the road.